What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and I'm going to go over a draft deck that I played recently in a draft yesterday, where I was actually able to win. Now, this is a simulated draft, of course. We don't know the full card pool. We're playing around on TTS, all unofficial. But I thought I'd give you guys a look at what this deck ended up as and kind of some of my thoughts on the drafting strategy as well. So, the leaders that I had to choose from here were Jin Urso. Jin was my first pick. I think she's extremely strong in the draft format. Her ability lends itself to these good unit trades, which can often be very effective. And deploying at 4/7 is basically what I would consider to be on curve, 6 cost 4/7. I consider that to be on curve. And then she has, oops, I accidentally drew her into my hand. And then she has a highly relevant ability as well. When she's deployed, she has that same -1 power effect, but as a passive, which generally goes great, allows you to get some good trades and really get a lot of advantage out of your leader. Um, my other leader options were Grand Inquisitor. So I always want to have, when I'm going into a draft, the first part is the leader draft, and I always want to have both a heroic and a villainy leader available to me so that I'm not locked into one or the other. And if I happen to see a stronger pool for heroism or for villainy, I can move in that direction. So I had Grand Inquisitor here, who I consider him to be decent, not amazing, but decent. And then I had Chewy as my third option. And I think Chewy is probably better in draft than he is in constructed. In constructed, I really think he isn't a great leader. Unfortunately, I think that Luke is a lot better as a similar option, even in kind of a generalist deck. But Chewy does have some major strengths in draft that, make him a more relevant choice. However, I thought that it was likely going to be between Jin, who I considered like arguably the best leader in draft, or Grand Inquisitor. So I wasn't considering Chewie as much. And what we ended up with here, I like to start off trying to stay kind of open. So I was starting off drafting yellow. And my thinking was by drafting yellow cards, I can either end up putting them into a Jin deck and then picking my other color later, or I can put them into a Grand Inquisitor deck and have my other color be red. But as the draft went on, I noticed that it seemed to me that there were some fairly good blue cards not being selected. So I think it was actually in pack 2 that I made the switch and started drafting blue and kind of locking on to cunning, vigilance, yellow, blue, heroism. So this is what I ended up with. I think this is a pretty solid pool. So for the early units, I end up with 7 early units. So I have 2 mining guild ties. These aren't that great. But they can be useful in that if you draw them later in the game, you can use them to draw yourself some more cards and get into better options. And they're also cheap. They only cost 1, and Jin's ability helps them survive against early units by making it so that they can, you can attack into your opponent's ship and give them -1 if they had 2 power, then they don't defeat you. Just a few little tricks like that. Um, so then we're going to go ahead and look at we're going to go ahead and look at some of the other things that were available here. So we have the snapshot reflexes 1 cost upgrade. When played, you may attack with attached unit. Really good card in the draft. For the other 2 costs, Lothal Insurgent, solid. Its ability, the opponent has to draw a card and then discard a random card. This is actually better in limited formats than it is in constructed, because in limited it gets the opponent closer to fatiguing, which is actually kind of relevant sometimes. Didn't end up mattering in this game, but something to consider there. I had a crafty smuggler who ended up being really useful in a game that I played against a Tarkin deck. I played out this smuggler, and my opponent ended up just passing. I suspect that he had thought that he was going to be playing a stormtrooper and buffing it, and the crafty smuggler is just a great counter to that play. 2 restored arcs, which I love to see. These guys are really good. 2 cost 2/3 with restore 1. That's a great profile. It's great in constructed and in draft. Really good unit. One Outer Rim Headhunter can attack as a 2-cost 2/3 and has this on attack ability that is relevant sometimes. Overall, not the best, but not the worst. I did also have 2 copies of Asteroid Sanctuary. Exhaust an enemy unit, give a shield token to a friendly unit that costs 3 or less. So that's some nice little disruption and shielding for my own stuff, especially for some of my strong 2 and 3 cost units. So then I had 4 copies of Rogue Operative, and I was really happy to see these 3-cost 2/4 with Saboteur and Raid 2. These were really going around. It seemed to me that Cunning Heroism was pretty open, and so I was able to pick up 4 of these, and they got great value for me in this in my draft. This unit hits really hard. 4 HP is enough that a lot of basic stuff won't necessarily remove it. Saboteur lets you defeat Sentinel and Shields. I had one game where someone had shielded a unit with a security complex, then I just pierced right through the shield and defeated it with the Rogue Operative. Overall, very solid unit. I had a Fleet Lieutenant, which is a great combat trick for rebels, and I did have a fair number of rebel units. Not all my units were rebels, but enough were that I didn't really have a lot of trouble with the Fleet Lieutenant. I also had a Wing Leader, another great buff for rebels. 2 experience tokens to another friendly rebel unit, and it gives you a body in space. Very solid card. I actually had seen 2 of these, but I didn't draft the first one that I saw because I was still staying open at that point. And I do think this is a very strong card. So if you can draft these, absolutely go for them. I had 2 copies of Waylay, which I love to see. Very solid disruption card, and can really set someone back if they play a big unit and you immediately Waylay it. 2 copies of Make an Opening, another solid removal card, especially good against aggro because it heals damage from your base. General Dodonna, who was an all-star, he was probably one of the most effective cards in my draft. 4-cost 4/4, other friendly rebel units get +1/+1. With all these rebel units I had, this went great. He worked with the Rogue Operative. He did a lot of stuff very effectively for me in this draft. Azatec Liberator Gunship, another very solid card. Efficient removal against opponent's space units and then stays in play with ambush. Very solid. Syndicate Lackey is another great ambush option. 5-cost 5/4 ambush, very solid. I had 3 Vigilant Honor Guards. This is another card that I noticed was getting passed around in a way that made me wonder what was going on and kind of improved my decision to head to the Vigilance Heroism. These guys really paid off. 5-cost 4/6. While this unit is undamaged, it gains Sentinels. This usually only gets to be a Sentinel once. Sometimes it can do better if you manage to shield it or to heal it or whatever. But 5-cost 4/6 and it's a Sentinel once and it has Rebel synergy is honestly pretty decent. Like stat wise, it's not like the pinnacle of efficiency. There's units with more efficient stats, but the like limited sentinel actually does have quite a good effect at times. So the vigilant honor guards did fairly well for me. I had one rugged survivors, which I actually don't like very much. I think this is sort of a weak card. The on attack, if you control a leader, you may draw a card. It like sounds really good, but controlling a leader unit doesn't happen as often as you might think. Um, Vanquish, great removal card, especially for big units. Happy to see it. Cargo Juggernaut. The healing on this was actually important in at least one game. And it's also just a big tough unit with shields. And yeah, not a ton to say about that. I didn't have a ton of blue units, which did mean that the healing was not entirely reliable, but I had enough to get by with this one. And then my last card was actually an out of aspect Bosk. Ambush him in for 7. I think I only ended up playing this once. This was something that I think I had drafted relatively early, just on the basis of it being a very strong card, and ended up including in my final deck, despite the fact that it was out of aspect. Now we can look at the rest of my pool and see if there's anything you like more. So the other main option, I could have done out of aspect Protector, which would have cost 3, but then given a unit Sentinel and a buff, could be useful in the right situation. I could have played Vanguard Ace. Unfortunately, I think this card is just really bad. I didn't want to play it. It's hard to get big value out of this thing. I could have played a Wilderness Fighter, but I already had a bunch of 3-cost units and ones that I think are better than Wilderness Fighter, so even though that was in aspect, it wasn't exciting. I could have played another Rugged Survivors. I think Rugged Survivors is already bad. I could have played Traitorous out of aspect. That seems not like a good thing to do for 7, especially with upgrade removal existing. I could have played Fet's Fire Spray or ATST for 8. That did not seem awesome to me. And I could have played AT-AT Suppressor for 10. Also didn't seem awesome. So I did end up with the boss, and he did well in one game. Other times I would resource him or whatever. But overall, this ended up being a pretty solid deck. I was able to kind of take good trades with my units and have Jin sort of help my guys take less damage, sometimes take out an enemy unit and remain on the board when otherwise they would have been defeated. Just do a bunch of stuff like that, and it was ultimately enough to get me the win. So yeah, I think that's the draft. And I don't know exactly I don't know exactly what I would say about drafting the most efficiently or whatever. Um I think that one thing I might say about some of this draft stuff is that the one of the things I might say about some of this draft stuff is that the way you can get a lot of value is sometimes by just going for things that you think are underrated. So, like these rogue operatives, I noticed these coming around, and I was like, "Man, this is a good card. People aren't picking this up. I don't know if people aren't in this color or what's happening, but I'm happy to sweep them up." Or the Vigilant Honor Guards, which I think is an underrated card more generally. I was running this above Chewbacca the unit back early on when fewer cards were revealed. I'm not playing this card now, but I think it's a lot better than people think. And I felt like these were, another source of value. Dodonna was huge. Dodonna is so good in a deck that has a bunch of rebel units. This buff is just really strong. And I also had a lot of removal and disruption. So these make an openings and vanquish are removal. The waylays, asteroid sanctuaries are disruption. I just had a lot of ways to kind of mess with what my opponent was doing, and ultimately it ended up being successful. Um, yeah, so that was the deck that I drafted, and I've really been enjoying drafting Star Wars Unlimited. So I'm probably gonna write a like more detailed article about this in the future, like for the Fifth Trooper or whatever. But yeah, also for those viewers who might not know, I've been writing some kind of strategy and like informative articles about Star Wars Unlimited for a site called The Fifth Trooper that I was familiar with from my Star Wars Legion days. If you want to check out my articles, I have links to them in the video description below and generally have links to them in the description of my videos. But anyway, a few thoughts on draft strategy. With the leaders, I like staying open. I like having those options available. If you force a certain color and it ends up being the wrong pick, you can really wind up in trouble. Even though you can see the leaders that other people around you have, that doesn't necessarily mean you know what they're going to draft, especially because the opponent has the opportunity to draft whatever base they want. And it creates a dynamic where it's like, let's say these are the leaders that I have, and the person who's going to be receiving the cards that I draft looks at this and it's like, okay, this guy doesn't have a green leader. He's not going green. It's possible that I'm not going green, but what if I saw some really strong green cards and decided that I was going to be playing Jyn Erso green or Grand Inquisitor green or even Chewie green? Like I could absolutely be drafting green cards and just saying, whatever I end up going with, green is going to be my base. So the leaders being face up doesn't necessarily give you as much information as you might think. The one exception to that is that there are some situations where someone will only have heroic leaders or only have villainous leaders. And if someone has that, that is a pretty sure sign that they're going to be playing villainy or heroism, and therefore that you're likely to be getting cards from the other sort of moral alignment when this person is passing to you. So if the person that's going to be passing to me has all heroism, that's a good sign that villainy is going to be a good option for me. And if the person that's mostly passing to me has all villainy, maybe I want to be going for heroism. Um, so that's an interesting thing. In general, I try to get in the leader draft, I try to get Leaders that I think are good. So Jin and Tarkin are two leaders that I think are really stand out in the draft format. Boba Fett is also very strong just because his stats are crazy. And so those are some leaders that I'm very excited to see. Um, I think that Sabine and Leia can also be pretty good if you want to play more aggressively. Um, but I want to get leaders that I think are good. But maybe even more importantly than getting the leaders that I think are best, I want to have some options. I want to have both heroism and villainy leaders available. And I ideally want to have multiple different color options that I can draft into. So in this case, I had three different aspects, and I had a heroism and villainy leader, and that's honestly in a pretty good spot, especially because I had Jin, who I consider exceptionally powerful. So, with your leader draft, I think you're often trying to diversify. You can also kind of try to mess up your opponents. Like you can try to, maybe you're going to try to force somebody into all villainy or whatever it is. You can try to do that if you want. But because leaders pass right and two of the packs are going to be passed left, yeah, like maybe if you force the guy next to you into all villainy on that second pack, you know that he's going to be passing you heroism stuff, but it's not quite the same thing as if you were able to force leaders on the person who is going to be passing you two out of the three packs. Um, okay, so then that's kind of some thoughts on the leader draft. And then for the general draft, I like to try and have removal. I like to try and have like kind of bomb cards, but it's funny, this deck doesn't really have super bomb cards. The closest thing might be Dodonna, who's really good if you have rebel units on board when you deploy him, and he's not exactly like amazing. So this deck didn't have this deck didn't have the overwhelming barrage, the home one, the Jedi Luke, cards like that where they can just hugely warp the game when you play them. Um, but it had a lot of efficiency, good leader, good removal options, good disruption, ended up being pretty successful. Um, Okay, so then other thoughts on draft. You can actually change your deck in between games, I believe, in this game's draft format. So it's conceivable that I could have been like, this Bosk is not working out. I need more Sentinels. Let's bring in the Protector. Or, let's bring in the Wilderness Fighter or whatever it was, something to consider. This is also relevant. Like, let's say that you have this Traitorous in your deck and you go up against an opponent and you don't play Traitorous in the first round, but you see they have a bunch of attachment removal, you should probably remove Traitorous and replace it with something else because playing Traitorous and getting hit by upgrade removal is just like crushingly bad. It's such a negative swing to have a really important card get taken out by something that costs less than it and maybe gives the opponent upside. Like I had a draft game earlier where I played a Traitorous and my opponent played a disabling Fang Fighter, took out the Traitorous, developed the board, and it cost less. And I was like, oh, honestly, that might have been game right there. That was just such a huge reversal of fortune for me. Um, I think we played it out, but I indeed lost. And you really don't want to be playing this into attachment removal. And there are some other things too, where like if the opponent has certain counters, it might be better off replacing that card with one of the other cards you drafted, even if it's a worse overall card, just to try and set up a better scenario for future games. And I'm not sure whether this will be true at like the highest level of competition or whatever. I know that in some games draft formats don't allow you or you have to like register your deck after you've drafted and maybe you can sideboard in between rounds, but maybe you're locked in. And we'll have to see what the exact rules are for, competitive play. Um, and if they end up even doing big draft tournaments, I think they have said the focus for major tournaments at least was going to be constructed. But I personally hope that we do see I personally hope we do see some draft events or some mixed format events. So Fab for big tournaments has often done both draft and constructed in the format. So there would be like, let's say it'd be like, you do a draft pod, then you play 3 or 4 games of Swiss, and then in the next day, there's more Swiss, and then also another draft pod before the cut. And I actually think that's really cool. And especially for like the really big, like world championship type events, I think it's nice to, test people's skills in different aspects of the game. So yeah, those are some thoughts on drafting. I thought I'm sorry that I don't have all the games. That I have to apologize, but I didn't record that one, and I thought it was a little ironic that I for the draft that I actually won, I didn't have a recording of what happened. But you know, that's how it goes sometimes, and I figured I would at least do this overview of the deck that I drafted and discuss some of my thoughts on drafting strategy. Hopefully, this was interesting to you guys. If you have any thoughts on drafts or other stuff, feel free to let me know in the comments. And also, if there's any other stuff you'd like to see from the channel, anything like that. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to y'all for watching. We'll be back with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.